So thank you so much for those lovely introductions. And it's an honor and privilege truly to be sharing the stage with you all and for making this event possible. And of course, with all of you who are here today in solidarity with Palestine. So I'm hoping that we can have a discussion that goes in three parts. First, focusing on the present, the legitimacy of the international order, or lack thereof, based on what we've seen over the last year, and the future of building Gaza. So perhaps we can start off with Dr. Barghouti. I'd like to ask you this question, and then the other panelists can answer in turn. How did we possibly get to this moment that we're seeing right now in Gaza, this awful moment?
It's hard to imagine how we got to this point. And I want first to thank everybody that is here today for showing your solidarity and support to Palestinian people in their struggle. And in supporting our struggle, joint struggle, not only to end occupation and the system of apartheid and discrimination that we are subjected to, but actually more than that. I think it's a joint struggle to bring down the whole settler colonial Zionist system in Palestine. And maybe what happened in the last months have shown and proven that really what we are facing is nothing but an extension of what started early in the 20th century, and that led to the genocide in 1948. And what we see today is that a repeated genocide, maybe a much worse genocide in terms of what's happening in Gaza. How did that happen? How could this war continue for more than a year and nobody would be able to stop this fascist government in Israel? Because it is a fascist government. I think there are four reasons or four factors that have to be mentioned here. The first one is the United States of America and some European countries that continued to provide support and protection to this terrible fascist government in Israel, even when it was conducting 3 war crimes at the same time and in parallel, including the war crime of genocide, the war crime of collective punishment, and the war crime of ethnic cleansing. Without the American support, without the United States protection, Israel would not have been able to run this war for more than a week, I assure you. Israel needed American military supplies immediately on the second day of this war. And if you read this new book of Bob Woodward, which I advise you to do, he mentions how when Blinken met with Netanyahu, few days after the beginning of the war, Netanyahu told him two very important things. First of all, he told him to pass the message, of course, to Biden, that the goal of this war is not only to destroy Hamas, but to destroy the Palestinian people, to ethnically cleanse all the people of Gaza and force everybody out of Gaza to Egypt. He reports that. And second, he said we need 3 things from the United States of America: weapons, weapons, and weapons. And that's exactly what he got. 50,000 tons of explosives that were thrown on Gaza. But it's not the only factor. There is a second factor, I would say, which is the very weak reaction from the side of the Arab governments and the Islamic governments, which could have used definitely a lot of leverage they could control to stop the United States from doing what it's doing. The third factor is definitely the rise of fascism in Israel. And I don't mean by that only the fascist government and people like Smotrich, who is the finance minister of Israel and the actual governor of the occupied West Bank now, who calls himself openly a fascist homophobe and doesn't hide his intentions. But I mean the very sad thing of the fact that a very big part of the Israeli society has moved to fascism in a way that I only can compare with the rise of Nazism in Germany. And that is, of course, a factor that could allow this government to continue this war for more than a year. But there is a final factor that I have to mention, a fourth factor, which is accepting and allowing up till today a double standard. The double standards of the world community when you compare the positions, for instance, in Ukraine with that in Palestine. A level of double standard that allowed this crime to reach this level. And I know you know a lot about what's happening, but let me just quickly remind you some figures, because they are shocking. 53,400 Palestinians killed, only because of bombardment. If we count the people who died from sickness and deprivation of food and starvation and lack of clean water, the number could reach 150, 180,000, according to the Lancet. 102,000 injured people, of whom 25% could die because there is no medical treatment and because most hospitals have been destroyed. 17,000 Palestinian children killed. Whenever I am interviewed in many Western media outlets, as soon as I mention the number, 17,000 children killed, they immediately try to stop the discussion. Because who could justify killing 17,000 children? It's 7%. Remember this number. The number of Palestinians and killed or injured in this war up till now in Gaza is 7% of the population of Gaza. In the Second World War, France lost, during 5 years of the war, only 4% of the population. 7%. If that had happened in the United States of America, you would be talking about 23 million Americans killed or injured. What would the United States have done if they lost 23 million people in such a horrible catastrophe? They threw on Gaza 85,000 tons of explosives up till now, which is more than 4 times the explosive power of each of the nuclear heads that were thrown in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Imagine 38 kilograms of explosives for each man, woman, and child in Gaza. 890 of my colleagues, doctors, nurses, and health professionals were killed. 186 journalists were also killed. There is no family in Gaza that did not lose somebody. And the most painful thing is the fact that you have at least now 4,100 people who have amputations, including 1,200 children who have no help now. I will never, ever forget that image, that video of that child who was 5 years old, who lost both of his arms. And he was asking his father, "Father, will my hands grow again when I grow up?" And of course, the father had nothing but tears. He couldn't even respond. We have to remember all of that when we speak politics, when we speak about the responsibility of those people who not only allowed the destruction of 80% of schools, all universities, more than 80% of houses, most mosques, the only 3 churches in Gaza. We should never forget the fact that now, at this moment, for 31 days now, the people in the north, more than 100,000 people, are starving because they have been deprived of water, food, medicines. Anybody who is injured now in the north will die because no ambulance could get to him, because there are no ambulances left. He will die because no hospital can reach him. And he will die even if he gets to a hospital, because all hospitals are besieged. This is happening now. And I can go on for very long time describing the situation. So we shouldn't forget that the 4 factors are the responsible for all these atrocities that we are facing. And it is our duty and your duty to do everything we can to pressure every government in this world to stop this atrocity that is happening and stop being complicit with this terrible genocide that is happening in Gaza. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti, for that thoughtful, of course, harrowing response on the situation in Gaza. So now I turn the question to Dr. Gilbert. Yourself, how did we manage to get to this point that we're at?
It is a sad answer that I will offer. I do not have a scientific answer, but of course I subscribe to all the numbers that Mustafa have presented to you. And I just want to expand a little bit on the numeric basis for this discussion, the evidence that we have, because it should not come as a surprise, because we've known every day, we have known these numbers for 13, 14 months now. All the governments, all the foreign ministries in the world have known these numbers, because they have been reported in such detail. And this is one of the reports that comes 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, from the United Nations Office of Coordination of Human Affairs, the OCHA office for occupied Palestinian territory. Anybody who likes to know the reality can read it. And I know it's read in all the ministries. It gives the numbers that Mustafa just reported, 43,061 killed. This is the last report from the 29th of October, on day 389 of the occupation and onslaught of Gaza. And then there is a tiny little column here to the left. These are the graphs of the killed and the injured. And these graphs are so mathematical that they almost fit an equation. And you might actually suspect that the Israeli occupation army has a demand on the number of people they should kill and injury per day in order to have this curve look as smooth and as increasing as it is. Supporting, of course, the point that Mustafa made, that the ambition of this is, of course, not to punish Hamas. It's not to control any military threat from Gaza. It is the policy of ethnic cleansing. It is the policy of elimination of a people. It is the policy of epistemicide, to eradicate the knowledge of an indigenous people in order to take their land. And unfortunately, this will override everything that we learned in school and that we teach our kids in school now about the United Nations and the human rights and the Geneva Convention, and that actually everyone has a right, women, children, whoever. We're such a wonderful democratic world. It's a big lie. Because had that been true, this had not been going on for 392 days. And the little column to the left here are the Israeli losses. And they have been standing at the same number since the 7th of October. And it reads 1,200 killed, reported killed. It's actually a little bit lower now, reported by Israeli authorities, 1,192, I think it was. And it is 33 children. That's, of course, 33 Israeli Jewish children too much. No child should get killed in an armed conflict. But compare that number to the other number here, 13,319 Palestinian children. And if you make a ratio between these, you get the mathematical expression of human value. And a Palestinian child's life is worth less than 1/500th part of a Jewish child's life. And this is, for me, an additional explanation to the factors that Mustafa listed. It is a deep lack of respect for the human value of a Palestinian life. It is the fundamental racism that will affect not only the Palestinian people, but any melanin-rich people, indigenous people in the global south. And it's part, of course, of the global colonial system. And this is so unsettling. It's so hard to digest, because we all thought that there was some justice in this world. We thought that they would look at the numbers and say, stop it. We thought that the Norwegian government would say, we'll block any communication with Israel. We'll divest the pension fund. We will impose all types of academic blockade. We will not continue any of the agreements we have until they stop the killing of the Palestinian people. They did not. They were protesting and they were sighing and saying, oh, this is bad and it's bad, and can you please comply with the Geneva Convention and international law? And they don't. There has been absolutely no power on this earth until now who has been able or willing to do what it takes to stop Israel from this ongoing killing spree. Today, the last number is from dawn today until now, they have killed 64 people in Gaza. 64 humans like you. Take it out. 5, 6, 7, 8 rows here. They kill, according to the last numbers, in Gaza, they kill 4 children per hour on an average. 4 children per hour. During the 2 hours we will spend together, 8 Palestinian children are killed. And this has been going on per hour, 24 hours per day, for 13 months. Would that have been accepted with any other people, white people? Of course not. If it had been the number 13,319 Jewish children killed, or had there been 1,018 documented attacks on Israeli Jewish medical institutions in Israel, as the UN just recently documented, 1,018 attacks on Palestinian healthcare facilities in Gaza and the West Bank since the 7th of October. Would it have been accepted? Of course not. And this is exactly what Mustafa pertains to, the double standards. But behind that double standard is a very disturbing, very unsettling, very, very morally depraved racism. And I think that for the West, we are seeing a moral collapse, both because nobody seems to want to uphold international law that we thought was a part of our life, but secondly, that they very, very rarely have been trying to stop the Israeli attacks on the Palestinian people, because this did, of course, not start on the 7th of October. This started in 1948, or as Ilan will tell us, even before that. So what led to this dramatic, horrific collapse of Western moral and morality and defense of human values is, of course, the endless Israeli impunity. They have enjoyed impunity since 1948. They've never been stopped. I've never heard any reaction after all the attacks I have experienced in Gaza. And every time they attacked healthcare, every time they killed the health workers, every time they attacked ambulances, they cut the water. 17 years of siege of Gaza, no water, no food, no medical supplies. Come on, it's been going on all the time with complete impunity until the Republic of South Africa said enough is enough. Let's take them to the ICJ. So my friends, yeah. So do I blame the governments of the West? Yes, I blame them. Do I blame the Norwegian government? Yes, I do blame the Norwegian government. Do I blame the Norwegian parliament? Yes, I do blame the Norwegian parliament. Because it's been too little, too late. And I totally agree with Mustafa when he says every one of us are obliged now to turn ourselves into powerhouses of activism and solidarity. Because this is about the future of our children, our grandchildren. We don't want this world. We don't want a world where might defines right. We want a world where human rights define actions of governments and where there is equality with regards to international laws and with the basic fundamental principle that every single life on earth is holy and should be protected. So should also the Palestinian lives. So we need to trap up, we need to increase, we need to stand up, and we need to demand from the current government, divest, sanction Israel, impose weapon embargo, and demand from the United States of America, which is our big boss in NATO, that they stop the export of weapons to Israel. That's the thing we need to do. Thank you. And by the way, my criticism was not directed at you.
Okay.
It was the nasty majority, not you.
So thank you, Dr. Gilbert, for bringing into relief or to light these staggering double standards, as well as to Dr. Barghouti. I'm wondering, Dr. Pappe, if we can at all make sense of the current moment, drawing from Dr. Gilbert's response and Dr. Barghouti's response in some historical context at all.
It's a very tough act to follow. I think that for someone like myself, who has been writing about the history of Israel and Palestine, living there, watching it, I was less surprised, probably, than many others at the level of the Israeli brutality and inhumanity. I warned against it 25 years ago. I said that this is where Israel is going. It will seek the historical moment in its eyes to eliminate Palestine as an idea, as people, as a country, because even if one Palestinian still exists inside historical Palestine, if there's still one person in the world that calls Israel Palestine, that believes that an historical injustice began in the late 19th century and has not ended until today, as long as this happens, with all the military might, the economic might, the global alliance that supports it, Israelis feel insecure and feel that they are not able to live a thriving life as they promised to generations of Jews, convincing them that it's much better to be in historical Palestine than to live anywhere else in the world, including many communities of Jews in the Arab world who didn't experience the anti-Semitism that Jews experienced in Europe and made the terrible mistake of coming to Palestine to become second-rate citizens themselves in the Jewish state. No, I'm not surprised, I'm afraid to say, by the level of brutality. But I am surprised by the incomprehensible indifference of the West. I did not anticipate that kind of level of total disregard for a genocide that is on our screen on a daily or if not hourly basis, where there's no way you can juggle with words in order to describe it as something else, where the numbers, the images, the stories are such that even if you are the most cynical politician, you would think that there is a modicum of humanity in you that does not allow you to say national interests, strategic interests, political interests are more important than for me to risk anything. And by that, even if I become complicit in the genocide, I don't care. I didn't expect it from the global West. Really, I didn't. I mean, I had very little confidence in the global West's ideas of universalism, international justice, and so on. I was very skeptic of the positions. But even with that skepticism, that kind of behavior and conduct, I could not imagine. This is something that really needs to look at further. The only explanation I can give, and that's what I'll try and do now, is, and I got this explanation from the very hysterical reaction, both in Israel, in places like Germany, right-wing parties in Europe, the Republican and the established Democratic Party in the United States. They are all reacting hysterically towards one word: context. They are really worried if you're talking about context. If you remember, when the Secretary General of the United Nations said that despite of his condemnation of the actions of the Hamas on the 7th of October, he wanted to remind the world that this operation was not in a void. There was a context. Immediately Israel demanded that he would be fired, and the American State Department published a condemnation of the contextualization, which was very tame, was not totally accurate, because he went to 1967, didn't mention 1948 at all. But the very idea that you can look at the Palestinian action on the 7th of October within a context of resistance, of anti-colonialism, as a response to more than a century of ethnic cleansing, genocide, and so on, is something that Israel demanded from the Western elites, and they responded gladly to that, not to be part of the conversation. Every newspaper in Norway, every newspaper in America, every newspaper in Germany, which is not part of the alternative media, does not dare to mention the context. And when you ask journalists why they're doing that, they said, well, you know, we have only 1,000 words to cover the events. I said, give me 50 words and I'll give you the context. There's no need for 1,000 words for that. And the most important context historically is not only what we all, I think, by now know, the ethnic cleansing of 1948 that created the Gaza Strip. There was no Gaza Strip before 1948. This was a Zionist idea of how to deal with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that Israel could not push towards the Sinai Peninsula because Egypt closed its borders. It was able to push hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the West Bank, to Syria, to Lebanon, but was unable to push them to the Sinai Peninsula. So they decided to create that strip, which you can see is a rectangle, a very clear shape, and created a mega refugee camp to begin with, between 1948 to 1967. But because so many people in Gaza are descendants, or were themselves, and then descendants of the 1948 refugees, and because of the density of this rectangle that was not supposed to host that number of people, of course the resistance there was always more stubborn, more powerful than anywhere else in Palestine. That makes a lot of sense to me. Nothing to do with political Islam or the left or the Fatah. You just have to live in the Gaza Strip and ask yourself, would you really be willing to do nothing in front of such a reality? And then as a reaction, Israel turned the mega refugee camp into a mega prison. When it decided that it cannot deal actually with the resistance, it took out the settlers and built the siege around Gaza and created it as a mega prison. And when the resistance continued from the mega prison, they even created something worse, something like an extermination camp in the days of the Second World War. They always upgraded the solution in their eyes to a problem that already they didn't find a solution to in 1948. But the context for me goes even deeper than that. And that's what I meant when I said you can do it in 50 words. Zionist project was a European solution for a European problem. Europe did not want to deal genuinely, honestly, with the Holocaust. It didn't want to deal honestly with the other crimes that were committed, not just by the Nazis, but by so many allies of the Nazis, including in this country. And they were unwilling. And they were unwilling to do the one thing that probably could have at least bring some justice and keep the Palestinians and Mustafa out of it altogether. I don't know if you know about it, this Mustafa. But there were ideas by some more honest Europeans that if some of the Jews want a state because of the experience of the Holocaust, give them Bavaria. Yeah. Give them Bavaria. That would have been the most reasonable, more logical, the most moral solution to what was done to the European Jews. But it was so easy to go back to the Zionists in Palestine who arrived there long before the Holocaust, who became part of this international, global European phenomenon of settler colonialism, where Europeans who were outcast in Europe, with the help of empires, took over someone else's homeland and tried to eliminate the population there in order to create the Europe that didn't want them. You would have thought that after 100 years, such an immoral, such actually impractical solution would not work. But Mustafa explained to us why it did work. It did not work because it was just. It was not work because the Zionist, contrary to what the liberal Zionists tell us, were incredible settlers who were democratic, moral, socialists, universalists. No, it worked because there was a global alliance that helped the project to impose itself by force on millions of people who in their culture, in their history, in their nature are not fighters, are not seeking to fight, are seeking to survive, seeking to have normal life. It was easier in a way because you could always mesmerize the Palestinians, and they did it 5 times during the mandatory period. And then they did it again during the peace process, and one of the biggest factory of sin in this respect was the Oslo Accord in 1993. They were told again and again, no, you have to understand, we, the world, will help you to, as brokers, we would bring this, we will reconcile what looks like impossible, the idea of a settler colonial racist apartheid state with your rights as the native indigenous people of Palestine. No wonder some Palestinians even fell for it. But it was a lie from the very beginning. There was no genuine wish. And it is not just because the people themselves were not honest, because that's the nature of the reality. The project is not working because it is based on these immoral foundations. And the only way we can begin, I think, to challenge that reality, apart from everything that you are all doing, which is incredible, the boycott, the divestment, the sanction, this is all historically would proven to be a very important contribution to the struggle of decolonization and freedom. If not tomorrow, then the day after tomorrow. Nothing is getting lost with such an investment of human ingenuity and commitment. But more than anything else, we have to get rid of any conversation that tries to evade the context of what we are talking about. Because then you are stuck by saying, all right, I will find us a solution for the West Bank, or I will find a solution just for Gaza, which is the one thing you don't want to do. You want a solution for the whole of historical Palestine. You want a solution for all the Palestinians, including the refugees. You don't want to create again an ideas of Bantustan and piecemeal solutions that actually perpetuate the longevity of the project that is not working. And this is something that is even beyond the Palestinians. This project is bad for the Jews. Israel is the less safe place for Jews. It's the only place where Jews have died in great numbers after 1948. It is the only project that increases anti-Semitism. It's the only project that destroyed beautiful Jewish communities in the Arab world, and everybody lost from this. The Arab world lost, and the Jews lost from that. And the Arab world is losing from that because rulers, corrupt rulers, authoritarian regimes can use the question of Palestine as an excuse not to deal with the injustices in their own countries. So this is the context. This is the context. And I was horrified to see directives coming from universities, managements in Europe, in some places, telling the faculties, don't use the word context, because the Israelis ask us not to use it. We will use the word context. We will remind people, also in Europe, the complicity is not just by being silent while the genocide is going. The complicity is by not dealing directly and faithfully with the issues of racism and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. This is all connected to the way that Israel succeeds of having this impunity that you're talking about. And I think that what really makes me hopeful that the younger generation is not falling for these traps, to my mind. The younger generations knows that racism is racism. There's no hierarchy of racism. There's not one form of racism like anti-Semitism that is worse than any other kind of racism. All racism is wrong. And I think there's enough understanding that there is no geographical distinction anymore between the world in which politics are exercised for the sake of the politicians and not for the sake of the people. And with this I will finish, every moment politics in this country or anywhere else become more moral, more reflective of what people's real problems are, Palestine is winning. Every moment that you are unable to change it, Israel is winning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pappe. Thank you, Dr. Pappe, for stressing the much-needed historical context that's lacking from mainstream media. And of course, that's deliberate, as well as from the administrations that you're mentioning at these universities. Before this becomes a conversation between the panelists themselves on this same question on how we get here, Honorable Member of Parliament Fiskaa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So could you tell us, perhaps drawing from your parliamentarian knowledge or expertise, like how is it possible that we're at this moment right now?
How is it even possible? Well, I won't give you any more historical explanations. Ilan Pappe has done that in a very good way. But the easy answer is, of course, US-American weapons. Not only US-American, also German, British, French weapons and money. Not only allowing Israel to do this mass slaughter, this ongoing genocide on the Palestinian people, but actively supporting this mass slaughter. And when it comes to the United States, I believe, going back to history, it's not a coincidence that they are supporting this. Being a country themselves, being actually based on a genocide. I think there are some historical background to be found also in their own history. Other Western countries as a whole, I agree, have double standards, not only allowing but also continuously supporting these war crimes. At the same time, claiming to be strong defenders of human rights, universal standards, international law, etc., but at the same time actively violating these standards that these countries say that they defend so strongly. In Norway, we have a government that, compared to most Western countries, this is a very bad company to be in at this moment, but compared to most other Western countries, we have a government that has been relatively clear, actually also admitting that Western countries have double standards and saying this is a problem. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs admits that other Western countries have double standards, and also says that this is a problem when we try to get the Global South to support Ukraine, which is obviously true, but this is not the only reason why this is a problem. But this is the main argument why these double standards are a problem. So the Norwegian government has been relatively clear in condemning Israel's acts, trying to sort of defend international law also. But there is a big but. Norway. The Norwegian government and the majority of the parliament are not willing to do what it takes to actually fulfill our obligations under international law. If we were to actually fulfill our obligations, we immediately should have withdrawn all investments in all companies that supports and upholds the illegal occupation and the war crimes. We should immediately withdraw all kind of indirect weapons sales to Israel. And why is this not been done for a year ago? I believe the main reason is that Norway and the Norwegian foreign policy is being constrained by self-imposed constraints because we want to be a loyal ally to the US mostly and to other NATO allies. So it's very hard for the mainstream, the establishment in the Norwegian foreign policy to have a very clear stand in this also, and to do what it really takes to fulfill our own obligations, and also to not only speak but also let action speak. And my last point, I believe one of the reasons why this is still going on is that we have two weak democracies in the Western world. We have weak democracies. We see that the freedom of speech in many countries is restrained. We see that police force is used against people who want to support the Palestinian cause. Not that much in Norway, but also here we have a lack of representativity in our parliament. I believe it's very clear that the majority of the Norwegian people do want the Norwegian parliament and the Norwegian government to do what it takes to fulfill our obligations. And sadly, we do not have that majority represented in Parliament. That is something we have to do to change.
Thank you, Honourable Member of Parliament Fiskaa. Before we turn to the question of the legitimacy of the international order, I'm wondering if any of the panelists would like to respond to any of the other. Dr. Gilbert.
I just have a question for Ingrid, because when I came from Tromsø the other day, flying in, I saw a humongous, very ugly ship sailing up through the Drøbakstredet, which is one of the biggest air carrier hangar ships in the world, sailing into the inner harbor of Oslo. Did anyone in the Norwegian Parliament or in your Committee of Foreign Affairs and Defense suggest to say to the American government, no, thank you, we will not have this visit as long as you supply Israel with weapons for the genocide? So it's very simple. Even if you knew that it would be voted down, did any of you suggest that in the committee or in the Parliament? If not, I think we have to widen the scope of our fantasy and our ingenuity and our smartness when it comes to active solidarity. And I'd like to quote one of the great anti-colonial guerrilla leaders, Samora Machel, who led the anti-colonial struggle against Portugal in Mozambique, and he became the first president of Mozambique, the free Mozambique. He says, solidarity is not an act of charity. It is an act of unity between people fighting on different terrains towards the same goals, just as you said, Ilan. Every little thing that we manage to defend in our welfare state, every time we manage to fight back against the oppression of women, racism, or privatization of our beautiful welfare state, that is a gain for the Palestinian people. And that's precisely what Samora Machel says. It's not charity. It is an active unity between people fighting on different terrains towards the same goals: humanity, equality, justice, and anti-colonialism. Did any of you suggest that that ship was not allowed to come to Oslo? Because I think it is an insult to any thinking person. And I read in Aftenposten, the auntie, Tanta, that it had no military significance. It was only to show force. So the Norwegian government and the parliament says, thank you very much. We're so happy you come to us to show force. So you see my point? There are so many possibilities that you don't take. And you would have the support of the solidarity movement. Wouldn't we have the support to that? Yeah. Yalla.
I don't think that was a question, because Mads Gilbert already knows the answer. We did not suggest precisely what he suggested. We could have done. It would have been voted down 2 months after the ship had left. So we of course can use other opportunities to again try to make the Norwegian government and the majority of the parliament understand that we have to fulfill our own obligations under international law, and we can use such opportunities. But I can reassure Mr. Mads Gilbert that we do have a lot of suggestions in Parliament as we speak that will be that the committee is considering at the moment, in line with what I've been telling you, withdrawing investments, stop indirect arms sales, etc. I guess it will be voted down again. We will propose it again, of course, until we have a majority. So we will not stop. I can promise you that.
Yeah, that's good. Just a final, actually, a question out of ignorance. Did anybody in the parliament or any committee suggest that the Norwegian parliament or politicians or government, or actually demand from the Norwegian government, that they direct the political demands towards the United States and not just towards Israel? That's my point. And we're part of NATO. Big boss is the United States. But I haven't seen any initiatives to try to hold the United States of America's government responsible for this humongous supply of weapons that has gone to and has facilitated, and the only thing made possible, the genocide in Gaza and in the West Bank or in Lebanon. Have anybody suggested to criticize Israel from the parliament? No, the United States?
Well, the parliament does not vote for declarations as such. We put forward proposals for what the Norwegian government should do or not do, and of course, many of our proposals is about keeping every country accountable for their own acts. So we could do what you are suggesting. Now there is election this very day and evening, and I guess what kind of demands we should put forward for keeping the U.S. accountable is also depends on what happens in this election. It's a kind of a tricky question, because I think what Norway should do is to do what we can do. We cannot make the U.S. to do what we would like them to do, but we can do what is right ourselves.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that we cover the remaining two areas. So perhaps for the individual responses for this section, we can limit it to perhaps just a few minutes, and then the panelists can...
No, we can go to the second question.
Yes, and then...
I think so, unless Mustafa wants to.
No.
No, I think
yes.
we should.
Well, maybe one little comment. I mean,
Sure, please, if
you keep asking why you don't criticize the United States, why you don't do that. Ask yourself the question, why Norway is in NATO?
Yeah, exactly. I'm against that. Of course. But given the fact that we are in NATO, does not mute our voice in criticizing other NATO members.
No, but I will explain in my next question the problematic aspect of this situation, because it's not... Palestine has exposed the hypocrisy of the West. And it's not just about Palestine. It's about so many other countries in the world. Yeah, please,
yes.
Let's not...
This is excellent. No, this is actually, this perfect segue actually into the section on the legitimacy or the lack of legitimacy of the international order with respect to what we've seen since October 7th alone, but of course it goes beyond that. So perhaps we can limit the initial responses to just a few minutes, and then the conversation among the panelists with this wonderful energy can continue. So Dr. Barghouti, do you feel that the international order has collapsed?
Well, it is commonly said that the world has created certain things after the Second World War. And we shouldn't forget also one aspect, because it also relates to this situation if we talk about history, that so many Western governments were silent about Hitler for a very long time, and about Mussolini and the rise of fascism, till they started to hurt themselves, till they started to be attacked themselves, the countries. They allowed him to swallow Austria, if you remember, if you, of course, you don't remember, but we all know that. and Czechoslovakia. You know the story, and till it reached their own yard. So the world order that was created, and everybody claimed it was about international humanitarian law and international law. And they claimed that the creation of Israel was some sort also of a response to the Holocaust and so on. But now what we see is really a true collapse. First of all, there is a very serious contradiction that actually reflects exactly the very good analysis of Ilan Pappe about why Israel was created in this manner. Now the creation of Israel is in conflict with international humanitarian law and is in conflict with international law. That is the reality. And after what happened in Gaza and in Palestine in general, by the way, it's not just Gaza. I mean, it's also the West Bank, which is attacked now continuously, and Jerusalem, etc. I think the crimes that have happened and the silence about these crimes have put the world in a very difficult situation. There is no more international humanitarian law. It doesn't exist. And if it exists, why it's not applied? There is no more international law. That is the reality. And so many people of the world and so many countries will suffer. Not only because they were silent about that, but because they didn't have a say even in what's happening. Because now the conclusion after what Israel was allowed to do with all these terrible crimes and so on, and with absolute and total impunity, the question will be, or the conclusion will be, is that any country that has power can do whatever they like, anywhere they want, and nobody will stop them. And in that sense, this little place, Gaza, has not only exposed the hypocrisy of the world, but actually it has created a situation where the whole international order is finished. And unless some corrective measures are taken very quickly, the consequences will be horrifying to every country, including your country, including Norway, because some other countries are much bigger than you. And if there are no laws in this world, then everybody will be affected. And by the way, just why Israel is why Israeli establishment, I would call it, not you personally, but why Israeli establishment is so afraid. They are so afraid of the history. They're so afraid of the past. They're so afraid, as you said, of the context. It's exactly like a thief. A thief who stole big thing, and he's constantly afraid, or she's constantly afraid of being discovered. And that's exactly the reality of Israel. What happened recently in the occupied Palestinian territories, and especially in Gaza, has reminded everybody, including us, the Palestinians, of the original sin of 1948, of the genocide that has happened. And contrary to this whole false claim that there is a possibility of a solution, a compromise between Palestinians and Zionist movement, now what the Zionist movement is telling us, there is no place for any compromise. No two-state solution. Look what did the Knesset recently approve. Not only the horrible law before the genocide in Gaza, which says that the right of self-determination in the land of historic Palestine, which they call Eretz Israel, is exclusive for Jewish people. And then a new law voted for not only by the government parties, but also by opposition parties in Israel, that says no place for a Palestinian state. And then a third law which says that UNRWA is not allowed to function here. And a fourth law that nobody can cooperate with UNRWA. And now there are a series of new laws one of them that if any Palestinian shows any kind of solidarity with Gaza and he or she is a teacher, they can be immediately kicked out of their job. And another law that anybody who participates in Palestinian resistance will be stripped away, they will lose their citizenship. This is fascism. Fascism in the most clear way. And those who were silent about the first fascism are now silent about this new fascism. That is the reality of what's happening. And I have to finish because I don't want to take much time, but there are serious questions we have as Palestinians to the world. Why international law is not applied in our case? Why international humanitarian law is not applied? Second, what is the right of self-defense? Because all you hear in the Western media, Israel's right to defend itself. Nobody says that we, the Palestinians, who are under occupation for 57 years, under genocide, which was practiced in 1948 for 76 years, and under siege in the case of Gaza, and under the worst system of apartheid, nobody says that we have the right to defend ourselves. While actually international law says that every people who are under occupation have the right to defend themselves using all forms of struggle, including military struggle, as long as they respect international law and international humanitarian law. So, and who is the terrorist? Why are we accused of being terrorists? Because we practice self-defense. We are the terrorists, but Israel, which has killed 17,000 children, Netanyahu, who killed 17,000 children, and who has destroyed to the ground a whole place called Gaza, is not a terrorist. This terminology of accusing Palestinians of being terrorists is totally unacceptable. Actually, the real terrorist is Netanyahu and his government. And then the next question. Who said that Israel, which is practicing occupation, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing, has the right to monopolize the status of a victim? Because that's exactly what they are doing. They are the victim all the time. Even when they are doing aggression, they are the victim. And they import the historical aspect of something we had nothing to do with, as you mentioned, which is the Holocaust, to claim that Israel is a constant victim even when it is committing crimes. And finally, the big question: are we all equal human beings or not? Because there is now there is doubt about that. Why we, the Palestinians, are not accepted as equal human beings? Basically, the whole attitude of all these governments that support Israel and that allow genocide is about specifically that racism which does not accept us as equal human beings. If a Jewish child should never be killed and his life is precious, a Palestinian child life is the same. And as I always say, what is the difference between Anna Frank, who was killed by the Gestapo in the Second World War, and Hind Rajab, who's a Palestinian 6-year-old child who watched her whole family being killed and was on the phone for hours asking for an ambulance till the ambulance arrived and was bombarded and she was killed? Anna Frank is Hind Rajab. They are the same. And I think that's exactly what we should emphasize. That's exactly what we should talk about all the time. Don't talk to us about anything before you accept us Palestinians as equal human beings. And that means we have the right to live, we have the right to resist, we have the right to struggle for our freedom. It's a precious right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti. I think just to be mindful of time, I'm wondering perhaps, because Dr. Barghouti has said so much of importance, could we actually delve into a discussion right now amongst the panelists with respect to any of the questions that he's raised, or points that he's raised? Perhaps beginning with Dr. Gilbert, and then the discussion can ensue.
Okay.
Yes.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Or would you prefer? Yes.
All right. I agree. I agree with Mustafa. I think that the whole moral basis, the whole logic, raison d'etre of the whole international legal system has totally collapsed when the hypocrisy was so painfully exposed, especially when people put in conjunction the war in the Ukraine and the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Of course, there were many more indications for that hypocrisy, but I think the proximity of the events chronologically made it easier for people to see that this is not working. And again, and Mustafa alluded to it, it's very important to go back to the historical origins of international law. And remember and remind ourselves that international law, the foundation of international law that have not been revised since the end of the First World War, which, by the way, were able to justify the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine in the United Nations Partition Resolution in November 1947, that discussion of what is universal law, what is international law, was done when half of the world was still colonized, when not one colonized person was part of the discussion of what is international law, when the United States still exercised apartheid, open apartheid system in the south of the United States, and South Africa in 1948 adopted apartheid officially as a state constitution. This is very important. And the attempts of the left in the global West had some success in 1960. Those of you who are familiar with the history of international law, in 1960 it was decided to include colonialism as a violation of international law. Now, some people who were from indigenous populations in Latin America, in Australia, in other places said, well, what about settler colonialism? What about the American colonialism against the Native Americans? What about the Australian colonialism against the First Nations of Australia? And what about the Zionist colonialism of Palestine? And the alliance that was created between Canada, the United States, Israel, South Africa, and Australia was to convince those who were responsible for running the international legal system in the world was that settler colonialism is a domestic issue that international law cannot deal with and is not part of the crimes that are identified by the international legal system. At that moment in 1960, it was an absolution for the previous settler colonial genocides of so many people in the world, but very few realize that this is far more than that. It's immunizing the genocide that hasn't happened yet, the one that's happening now in Gaza, and the one that was already started before. It is this kind of realization that everything that is described in our world as universal, as international, is very limited. It's Western. It's not universal. It's not international. And nobody is really able to get over it because it has been going on for so many years. You know, even the best manifestos that you can read of the communist parties and the leftist parties in Europe in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s are not exempt from racism. This is part of the whole issue that comes to haunt us. And I agree, Gaza opened it up. But of course, the problem is everywhere. The British and European, I say because of Brexit, I don't put them now together, so I have to mention, they make all my sentences long, Brexit. So Britain and the EU, used to say EU, that's enough. Britain and the EU, I would say that some of their immigration policies are colonialists. It's a total lack of recognition of the connection between the way Europe thrived and succeeded at the expense of the colonized people, creating the havoc and misery in the colonized world, and then claiming it has the right to block the way for people from the colonized world. This is part of the same colonialism, and I think that's one of the most, with this I will end, one of our most difficult challenges, particularly about Palestine, but you will find it in all other issues that you want to deal with in this country, for instance, with people who seek life, immigrants and so on, and indigenous people who fight for their rights. The biggest problem for us that for years we taught in high schools and universities and documentaries and media that the age of colonialism ended in the 1950s when the world was decolonized. The world was not decolonized. Some spaces were decolonized in the sense that the colonial power physically left. But the minds of people were not decolonized. And especially when it comes to Palestine, it's so difficult to say that what you once thought was a 19th century phenomenon is actually happening in front of your eyes. And this is a challenge to everyone, for universities to understand where should they teach about Palestine. Not in the Department of Political Science, not in the Department of International Relations, not even in the Department of Middle Eastern History, where you teach about colonialism, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. That's when you should teach about Israel. That's the right academic place for this. This is what should go into the curriculum in high schools. When we will be able to produce that kind of knowledge and understanding, it's a long-term project. So it doesn't contradict what we should do urgently to stop the genocide. But to build again this historical knowledge and understanding of these trajectories that have brought us to this moment, and believing that these were made by human beings, not by God, not by external forces from the outside space, and human beings can change it. They can demand different kind of understanding what is universal, what is international, who has the right exactly to defend themselves, who has the right to live as equal people. It's funny, but we need to go back to some of the most basic words we have in our languages that we took for granted, such as equality, such as universal law or international law, and ask ourselves, do we fully understand what they mean, and are they fully practiced? And if not, start from scratch and give these ideas a new and more fitting meaning. Thank you.
Yes, if I may add, and going back to the question, do we see the collapse of the international law? I'm not so sure. Of course, we do see that the international law, and I believe international law is full of mainly good standards. It's The UN Charter prohibit making a war of aggression illegal, saying that every people have the right to defend themselves against wars of aggression, occupation, etc. These are very good universal standards and laws that we should all defend for the reasons that Mr. Barghouti said earlier. Do we see the collapse of this international law? Well, if you see it from the ground in Gaza, it's very obvious that you have to say yes, because there is no international law protecting the people in Gaza. But we do see also that, especially the global South, is mainly, to a large extent, I would say, really defending these universal standards. And the case against Israel in the International Court of Justice brought by South Africa is a very good example of that. And I believe I do see also a lot of people in both the global South, but also in Western countries, defending these universal standards. But what we do see a collapse of is the so-called Western civilization. And this is not new either. Mahatma Gandhi was once asked, "What do you think about the Western civilization?" And as I've heard, he said that would be a very good idea. And this is what I believe we see also today. And the case of the ongoing genocide really sheds light on this issue, that the so-called Western civilization maybe never existed, but certainly is collapsing as we see it. And that may also, I don't think that is a good thing, but it may be an opportunity to ask those simple questions again. What is equality? Do we really believe that all people are equal? Yes or no?
Yeah, I'd like to agree that there is not a collapse of international law, but I think there is at least a temporal collapse, because none of the Western powers have been stepping up to stop what is going on in Gaza. As we are speaking, the Israeli occupation forces are bombing the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza for the third time. There are 3 remaining hospitals in northern Gaza for 200,000 people: Al-Auda, Kamal Adwan, and Indonesian hospital. Kamal Adwan used to have 75 doctors. They have 2 left. They used to have 70 nurses. They have 7 left. They have more than 100 patients, many of them children with shrapnels in their bodies needing surgery. They can get it at Shifa Hospital a few 15 minutes away, but there are no ambulances. This is going on as we are speaking, and 4 kids are killed per hour. And where is this international order trying to stop Israel? It's nowhere to be found. And that leads me to the next question. I think Mustafa is placing a very important and very serious responsibility on us. And I'd like to give a little upbeat, because I think it's fantastic that tonight, on the crazy election in the United States, you decide to come here and we fill this audience. I think we should give that an applause, because we want to take on that challenge that you place on us. And as I said, the only explanation I have for Kamal Adwan, what is going on there now, and these numbers that we've known for the better part of 13 months, it's a deep-rooted colonial racism. And every one of us, we can be an island of anti-racism and activity. And that's where we have to start, because what the powers want us to feel is helpless. And I don't want you to leave this meeting tonight and feeling helpless or overwhelmed. Because the fact that you are here, the fact that Oslo has a tradition of solidarity, the fact that we have the mixed artist choir, the fact that we have mittens being knitted for Gaza, the fact that we have, everyone has a voice and everyone has a talent. And the only way they can conquer us is when they make us feel alone. Once we get together and we form a small group or a big group, a small demonstration or a big demonstration, we take the power in our own hands. I'm a medical doctor. I'm not trained to treat symptoms. When I talk about Gaza, I cannot talk about the liters of blood or the types of infections without addressing the root cause of all the misery, which is the occupation of Palestine, the Israeli settler colonial project, and the racism. I have to talk about that. When I talk about that, I'm 100% excluded from Norwegian media because they don't want the context. They want to use humanitarianism now as a kind of morphine to heal or horrible feelings, and we want to let the NGO army, what you could call it the humanitarian industry, to try to patch up all that we feel of despair. But I tell you one thing, the NGO industry is part of the problem because they never address the root cause. And recently, one organization, which I have been a very sort of committed part of, said that we take no stance in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And I thought, what is going on? Because until the relief industry address the root cause, we're not getting anywhere. And we have to start talking about racism, colonialism, the Israeli responsibility for all this misery, and we need to talk about our support for the armed resistance of the people who are occupied. The armed resistance. And the solidarity movement must be more brave in defining the context and addressing the parliament and the government with our demands that address that context and that root cause. Until we get rid of the occupation of Palestine, no solidarity movement in the world can change the misery for the Palestinian people. That is our duty. And if every one of you go out from this meeting today and decide for yourself that you want to be a powerhouse of solidarity, we're going to change the world. We're going to change the Norwegian government. We're going to change the reality of the Norwegian politics. It's up to us.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert. I'm wondering, actually, as a follow-up to that, this is now our third segment on rebuilding Gaza, because I think it speaks to some of the points you were mentioning with respect to the humanitarian industry, or the NGOism, if you will. How can we, as an international community that's genuinely invested in the rebuilding of Gaza, do so without reproducing colonialism, without reproducing structural racism, without reproducing apartheid, without doing any of these things, honoring the collective determination and autonomy of the Palestinian people?
I have a very short answer and then I keep shut. Listen to the Palestinian voice. That's why we invited Dr. Barghouti, because we have for far too long been deciding here in the European countries what the Palestinians need, what is the situation. Bring up in front the Palestinian voice. They know what they need from us, and let's reply to that.
Yes, Dr. Barghouti.
I put the ball on your foot.
Sure. You're most welcome. By the way, Netanyahu just fired Gallant. I was just looking, yeah.
Bad news or good news?
So he's creating now internal trouble. He's using the day of the American elections. Well, before we talk about rebuilding Gaza, we have to stop the destruction of Gaza. We have to stop the genocide that is happening. So the most important and immediate task now is to stop the terrible aggression on Gaza. And I can't even call it a war, because it's more than a war. It's an aggression. It's not two sides fighting. It's one side destroying a whole country. And that applies to Lebanon. Now, up till this moment, the Israeli army erased to the ground 36 Lebanese villages. Completely. I mean, not a single house is left. Everything was destroyed. So you are talking about such a destructive force and such a terrible violation of every human right. And that's why the most immediate goal is to stop this madness and stop this terrible fascist from continuing this war. And that cannot happen except with a very, very huge two operations. One is pressure on your governments to really take different stands from what's happening up till now, and to create the largest possible boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign worldwide. Not a BDS campaign that is not even limited to ending the war, but to ending the occupation and ending the system of apartheid. What we need to see is a very large boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, similar and even bigger to what happened during the apartheid system in South Africa. I remember the first time I came to this wonderful country and the first time I met your people here in Norway was in 1987. I remember it was a very cold winter, and it was January. And the house I stayed in was a house which hosted the representatives of the ANC from South Africa. And Norway, and I told your members of parliament yesterday this, and also I told it to the foreign minister today. Norway was in the avant-garde of anti-apartheid and in creation of a huge solidarity movement against the apartheid system in South Africa. We need Norway to be in that place. I think now even your government is convinced that this whole game of being a mediator between us and Israel is over. And it's not necessary. What you need to be as a country, as people, is not to be a mediator between the criminal and the victim, but to be in solidarity with the victim, to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And that means immediate and total divestment from any company that deals with Israel. You have, up till now, I was told by your colleagues that you have about $2.3 billion of investment still in 50 companies that are classified as participant in the crimes, because they support settlements, they support military structures that support Israeli aggression, and so on and so forth. So you have a very clear task here, and please believe in yourself, because I totally agree with you. Every voice here matters. You are a small country, and voices will matter. I think the power you have, if you exercise it on the parliament and on the government and on the parties, will eventually make a difference. And they already divested from Elbit, and that's a very good step. They already recognized Palestine. I remember coming here and talking to your government about the need to recognize Palestine. And today they told me, as you see, we have recognized Palestine. Well, great. But now we need more. And that means pressure them. Now is the time. You have every element that allows you to exercise effective pressure. Now is the time to pressure. If you take away these $2.3 billion from that investment, this will make a difference. And then push more. I know you have contacts with European governments and with European countries, other European countries. It's shameful that Europe continues to be the largest trader with Israel. And I think countries now, like the Prime Minister of Spain, is calling now to finish this agreement between Europe and Israel. So there is a precedent here, and I think all of that has to happen. Now about reconstruction. I promise you, we will rebuild everything that was destroyed in Gaza. We will rebuild every school. We will rebuild every clinic. we will rebuild every house. We, the Palestinians. Whoever wants to help us, you're most welcome. But it's not just that. We want something else. We want Israel to be forced to pay compensation for every house they have destroyed. And I promise you, we will follow them. They forced Germany to pay lots of compensation for the destruction they have caused, which is good. They also have to pay compensation now. Even if we can't force it now, we will continue. We will never stop. Every crime that was committed will be remembered. Every person that was killed will be remembered. And we will not stop. As I told you, we have the right to struggle for our freedom, and we have the right to struggle for every person, every child, every man and woman, every house, every hospital that was destroyed. And I want to thank you, because I don't want to take more of your time. I know we are limited with time, but as a representative of Palestinian Medical Relief Society, I want to thank you for the fact that you came today, because by coming and participating in this meeting, you are supporting us. And I want you to know that at this moment, we have 76 medical teams working all over Gaza, from the north to the south, including Jabalia, including Beit Lahia, including the destroyed places. And our teams are providing treatment to 200,000 people every month. They are providing care to the injured people who cannot stay in hospitals. They are providing care to the people who are suffering now from terrible infections. 112,000 people are suffering from infectious hepatitis now in Gaza. And as I agreed with some, I don't want to speak on behalf of others, but Israel actually is conducting not only genocide, they are conducting implicit biological warfare and implicit chemical warfare on the people of Gaza. And we are trying to deal with that. So thank you for your help. And I want to say to you, on behalf of all these wonderful heroes in Gaza, they're all from Gaza. All our medical teams are from Gaza. The doctors are from Gaza. The nurses are from Gaza. These are real heroes that are doing wonderful work. And I want to tell you that they thank you for being supportive to the great work we are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Gilbert, did you want to jump in just quickly before we go to the final word? Or just,
two very
yes.
short comments
sure.
on what we can do, because I support everything
Yes.
Mustafa has said. And I think we actually need to continue this work to establish a platform like the Oslo Conversation, where we make sure that the Palestinian voice is amplified again and again. And this is only the start. We will do that. But our homework is, number one, to get educated. I call it evidence-based solidarity. We need to study more. We need to know the facts. We need to read the history. And we need to go beyond Free Palestine, beyond Children Should Live. We need to go for the context in our solidarity work now. We need to address end the occupation of Palestine. We need to address end the genocide of the Palestinian people. And we need actually to be very vocal in our support for the occupied people's right to resist, also with weapon, within the limits of the Geneva Convention and international law. Second thing I think we have on our work list is to engage the sports in Norway. We need to engage soccer, football, handball, and we need to build preparedness for the day when an Israeli national team or any club comes. We have upcoming bicycle rides in our competitions in Norway this coming summer. And I think we have been far too lenient in allowing the sports community not to make a stand and show where they're standing. And then I think we can do a lot more with the unions. I think the unions have made some very important statements in LO-Kongressen, but they're not been followed up. Why don't we have a general strike in Norway against the genocide in Gaza? And we are the people who can be the nucleuses for that organization. The youth, we need to engage the youth even more. Today's poll shows that our next prime minister may be Sylvi Listhaug. We have a lot of work to do. We have to roll up our sleeves, because if Sylvi Listhaug and the Progress Party are becoming the majority party after the next election, Palestine solidarity will face more tough challenges, but we will never give up. We will never stop until there is a free Palestine. You can trust us on that. Thank you.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, of course.
yes.
Final comment.
Well, yes, I think we have time just for a final word. We'll perhaps start with the Honourable Member of Parliament, Fiskaa, and with Dr. Barghouti. So, final word, 1 minute.
I agree with Mats Gilbert in that the hope lies in the people of Norway. The general opinion is very clear. But we have to work even harder to engage more people, to educate ourselves, to use all those kind of opportunities to build a stronger solidarity movement based on the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people, and to not be complicit. To withdraw all our money and contributions to the war crimes and to the occupation, and to build this solidarity movement on these principles. I see a great hope in the people of Norway, and also in many other Western countries, that we have the opportunity to, maybe slowly but gradually, also change the politics of Europe and the Western world.
Very little to add to the fantastic evening and great encouragement. I would say we also need to expand our groups. We have to include not only the usual suspects, not only the people who are convinced. And one way of doing it is to understand exactly what intimidates, what prevents good people who are not here tonight from expressing solidarity with the Palestinians. Israel weaponizes in this country, as in everywhere else, two weapons. One is the allegation of anti-Semitism, and the other one is an allegation of Holocaust denial. Instead of saying we are not anti-Semites, we are not Holocaust deniers, we should take the initiative and talk to people and explain to them how Israel is part of anti-Semitism. Talk to the Jewish people who understand it. Remind people that there are many, many Jews in the world who are not Zionists, and unfortunately, there are many Zionists in the world that are not Jews. Unfortunately, there are even Arabs and Muslims who are Zionists. So we have to make sure that this is the conversation, that we are talking about an ideology that even people who are not here today, I'm sure, would accept that is not one that they can support or endorse. But they are intimidated, because it is intimidating to be called anti-Semite in this country or any other European country, or to be called the Holocaust denial. Instead of just being on the defense, we should take the initiative, and we should talk about the Holocaust, we should talk about anti-Semitism, we should talk about racism, and make sure that the people who are lead the conversation of all these dark historical moments, current problems of racism, are the people who are in full support with the Palestinians. And this would expand our groups and movements, and we will not be stuck only with the groups that we already know and with our usual suspects. We have a message that has to be based on the belief that most of the people who are not with us yet and are not here are good people, are not bad people. But they are facing a propaganda that is powerful, that has been 100 years old, that is using these tactics of terrorism and intimidation also against you, in order to make sure that this is the only group that would come. We have the way of doing it, but we have to be taking the initiatives on all these issues and not just on solidarity with Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. I just one small addition to what I was said before. I think sanctions should start with total military embargo on Israel. This is the most immediate task. That's first. Second, I think we are in a very difficult position. We're suffering a lot. But you might be surprised from what I will say. In reality, the worst situation is where Israel is. And I think in our suffering and in all this situation, we managed to defeat the biggest conspiracy against Palestinian people, which was to liquidate the Palestinian issue completely and marginalize it through normalization with the Arab world and put us on the side and allow Israel to totally annex the Palestinian territories forever. We defeated that. Already it's defeated. And more important, I can see re-energization of a whole new generation to understand the Palestinian issue. I remember less than maybe 2 years ago, when I attended solidarity meetings with Palestinians, you would look at the hall and see only, with all due respect, of course, to old people, and I am among them, you will only see old people sitting in the hall. Now look at yourself. It's a whole new generation that now is back to, is coming now to support the Palestinian people and the Palestinian right. And that's why I am so optimistic about the future. Because, and Lena told me how many new members you already have now in Norway. She tells me now every day you have new members in the Solidarity Committee. That's a reflection. That is a reflection of the new reality. And it's not only here, it's also in the United States. When more than 77% of the younger generation in the Democratic Party in the United States does not agree with Biden and is supportive to the Palestinian cause, that's a huge change. And it will reflect itself on the future if we continue to be well organized and if we are also more organized and better organized. So I am optimistic about the future. Even young Jewish people in the United States who are now organizing and saying, not in our names, we will allow Israel to continue to commit these crimes. These are very encouraging things. So we are on the right track, guys. We are winning, and we will be victorious, and they will be defeated. But I ask you for one thing. Every morning when you wake up, remember the children of Gaza. Remember the people of Palestine. Remember the struggle. And let's try to get organized more and more and more, because we can only defeat them with much better organization. Thank you so much.
I was sure I would shut up, but I couldn't, because a very practical, direct action from what Mustafa just said is, before you leave this audience tonight, if you're not organized, organize yourself, become a member of the Palestine Committee tonight, please.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, so much for being here in solidarity with the guests with Palestine. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes.